welcome everyone to the advisory ecosystem. Always so grateful for you to take time to spend with us. The topic, so important, so exciting. Obviously, we've got a lot of demand on this, which is accelerating value realization, something everybody's talking about, something that we really want to get better at and leverage the collective wisdom of this community. So we're excited to go forward in this area. One thing I'd like to mention just up front is back in May 21st, the advisory ecosystem kicked off this concept of workshops. And we had a wonderful session on the elements of value. In fact, one of the authors of that, Eric Almquist, is with us today, which we're always grateful, a fellow member. And that's something that's going to be transpiring where we build these little breakout groups where people really want to dig into an issue and workshop it ongoing. And so that's kind of an exciting evolution of the community. And today is another installment on that. Today is an installment of teeing up a workshop around value realization. And so we're excited to kind of talk with you about it. Here's a little bit on our agenda. We're going to be talking about some survey results. We're going to be talking about some value selling, value realization solutions in place. And then we're going to be putting a call to action around joining this work group ongoing. To lead us in this conversation is somebody eminently qualified, a good friend, somebody I've worked with for 15 years, Eric Ranta. So Eric, as Kasia mentioned, leads the North America Cloud Advisor practice for Google Cloud, has a rich history in value and value programs, all the way back from SAP to Workday to now leading North America for Google. So I think Eric and his team, he'll introduce some colleagues, are eminently qualified to kind of lead us in this discussion. The beauty is this is members talking to other members, all practitioner-led. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to lead our session.
Yeah, Chad, thank you. And with us today, I've got two esteemed colleagues, Ted Orr, who's our Director of Customer Success. He's had numerous sales, professional services, and other related roles at companies like Oracle, VMware, and was a ecosystems customer at Sumo Logic. Another gentleman with a rich consulting background is Eric Lamb. Both of he's at Google Cloud as well, working in our solutions organization and specifically in partner engineering, is really spearheading some interesting thought around how you realize value across a greater ecosystem. I just want to give some reflection. You know, I started doing value-related things with a handful of folks, and I looked at the participant list, and many of you are familiar. Thank you for coming, and moreover, good to connect with you again. When I was at Siebel, there weren't a lot of people that were doing this, and this was kind of the 2000, 2001, 2002 timeframe. And it was kind of an esoteric little skill set that really hadn't been proven out. When it was at SAP, more and more companies started to do it. But one of the things that I really struggled with was, where do you go and learn from one another? How do you actually go and get insight from what others are doing? How does all this come together? And so I used to reach out individually to a variety of different people. I wouldn't call it stalking on LinkedIn, but it might have been close. Get together, connect, and just try and share ideas. And so this kind of forum is exactly what I want to not only participate in, but I also, because it's so important to me and it's such a passion that I have, is making sure that I can play a little bit larger role in helping steward it going forward. So I'm delighted to be able to do this. I'm in your gratitude, and hopefully going forward, we can have some rich discussion around the value management track. Some interesting research came about from the Technology Services Industry Association, and this was as recently as May. And what we've done is we've abstracted it here to kind of set up the overall thinking, if you will,
yeah,
and hopefully tee up a good dialogue and good discussion.
Bring it to me.
The first one that we have is sales must be more focused on the value and outcomes that solutions deliver. And I think this quote is profound, but it's only half right. Sales must be more focused on outcomes. Services must be more focused on outcomes. Products must be more focused on outcomes. Support organizations must be more focused on the outcomes. This is not just incumbent to one group, and all depending on how your sales structure is set up. It really takes a village to go and realize that value for the customer. And the next part is they actually did a few follow-up questions, which I think are really pertinent to share. And the first one that we have here, I'll just kind of let you take a moment, consume it. People thought they were pretty good at discovery, For the most part, their process is designed to do value discovery and identify those highest priority business outcomes. And so if you look at it, about 90% felt like they were okay at it, or potentially their discovery process was designed to do just that. Now, an interesting corollary, if you think about it, would be what would the customers say on did the actual vendor get that highest priority business outcome? And I think that's something that this data is important, but would the customer say the same thing when we're not in the room? Would the customer say the same thing in a survey? And my hunch is that they would probably give us a little bit lower marks than what we would, what the TSI poll reflects here. Now, they asked another question, which I thought was really interesting as well. And again, this is timely information. This was back from May. Is do you measure the business outcomes that drive the financial value from your solutions with your customers? Basically, 3 out of 10 have a formal process in place to be able to do that and to be able to gather that. A handful of them do occasionally. It's done informally, usually done probably per request or if a particular issue pops up. And then a handful have said, no, not at all. And I think this is one area that if I think back to, Chad mentioned that we've been together 15 years. This is probably one area that our function has underperformed as an industry. And if we look at it being technology service providers or SaaS companies or infrastructure as a service, have we really cracked that code where we can demonstrably go in a repeatable, scalable way and say, yes, this customer has achieved this outcome. This customer has achieved that outcome. It's underperforming. This is how we get them course corrected. That value narrative, I think, is oftentimes very important in pre-sales. And then it kind of flares up at particular points in time. But for most customers, it is not something that they do on an ongoing basis. And so Jennifer is going to throw up a quick informal poll. If you want to take a look at that real quick and go ahead and respond to it. Jennifer, is it up, or do I want to give you a little bit more time?
I'm on mute, sorry. My keyboard, there we go.
All right, folks. So pause a minute and go to the group chat. And for those of you who maybe are not able to get to that chat, the question is your organization doing a great job using discovery to define business outcome? And the beautiful thing about chat is, boy, this is a very honest group, very tough on themselves. No, good, not great. Thank you, Doug. Excellent. Reasonable for top accounts. Good, good. All right, so you can get an idea here is that the punchline, we do discovery, we think we get the business outcome, but how do we make that an enduring? How do we make that a long-term? How do we make that actually a sustainable piece of our overall relationship that we have with the customer? And I think the last couple of months have been an informative guide. If you think about the previous years before, and it was even probably about 8 to 10 years, it was a very predictable pattern in terms of the way that our customers were going to be able to not only forecast and monitor and invest in their business, but we got actually into that mode where business became fairly predictable. And then we had a pretty significant demand shock. And I bet most of you have come across customers now who have said, our business has either spiked or our business has completely contracted, and now we need to course correct. And it'd be really informative for whether you have a business that's going through the roof with certain customers or other customers who are really, really struggling. If you had a notion of what that business value that you provided back to them, and that had been circulated and coordinated over the course of time. So let's go to the last polling question. This one's a little bit different. This was actually asked for all of you folks. A good thing to remember is that whenever you get an ecosystem or an email from ecosystem, always look into it because they're going to be asking you some questions and some comments. And the most important part here is, are you actively doing value realization in your organization? And it was roughly split, half and half. And so we got 13 responses. We have over 30 some odd people on the call here today. So I think we'll dive into that a little bit later. But it's interesting because this group in particular saw that they were actually doing better than the overall technology services industry, that they were actually more focused on it and doing value realization within their organization. So maybe this represents some of the highest and best thinking within this group, and hopefully the conversation later in the day will tease that out. All right. Now, we'd like to open it up, but for those of you who can come off mute, we just wanted to isolate one simple question, and what is one thing that you are doing within your organization to advance the value realization topic? And folks, any comment, nothing's too big or too small, but if there's one thing that you're doing that you would like to share with the rest of the group, please unmute your mic and introduce yourself and your company and what's that one thing you're doing.
Hey, Eric, I'll jump up and go first. So, hey guys, Rob DePaw. I am with New Relic, and just to answer the question, this is also an area of passion for me, and you know, I've been doing this for some time. And what we're doing is, last year, or when I joined, I ran a value realization program pilot, and this year it's become a formal program. So I'm pretty excited about that. And there are a number of entry points, just as Eric was describing. How do you drive success in regard to business outcomes? And I'll pause there, but we'll have more discussion later.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome.
Thanks.
This is Shek. Hi, Eric.
Hey, buddy, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, you know, we are in my current organization. We're doing you know, some value realization work, really focusing on like really understanding what is it that you ought to measure. Because I think most of the time the challenge is people want to measure the business case itself, and that's more of a lagging indicator of success. And really what needs to be measured in a value realization framework are kind of leading indicators, right? What is it that you need to have in place in order to ensure that you have adoption of your solution, that it's consumed, it's actually driving outcome, that data quality underneath is appropriate, and so on. So we use like a capability maturity model to do the assessment, like in the value discovery phase. And we roll that same assessment to kind of provide value monitoring so that we can make the fine tuning and adjustments that are warranted in order to ensure that we hit those business outcome in the value realization phase.
Eric, you're muted.
Apologies, I've got dogs that are downstairs and I just wanted to be protective. Thank you, Doug. Shek, you had leading and lagging indicators. How do you distinguish between the two in terms of how you do the value realization? I thought that was a fairly astute comment and wanted to.
Yes, yeah. Is this for me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So lagging indicators are, you know, things that you kind of materialize in your business case, right? It would be, hey, I increase revenue, I decrease cost, or I improve productivity, right? So that is what us vendors, right, want to showcase in our case studies. Like customer ABC bought from us and they reached the moon. But actually, when you think of how do I monitor that, you know, there are some lagging indicators underneath. So if, for example, a lagging indicator, a leading indicator would be like in the cloud would be solution adoption, right? So if you design a really good outcome for X million, but you had projected that your solution would be consumed and leveraged by 200 users and you end up with 3 users using it, there's no way you're going to achieve that outcome unless it's by accident. So it's actually breaking out your lagging indicators into leading components. So solution adoption, you know, is the quality, you know, of your data appropriate? Have you provided, you know, training and appropriate change management to achieve those outcomes? Are these things reported on an ongoing basis? To me, all of these would be more leading indicators. They basically, you know, the lagging indicator is the final number, but what's really difficult to track and actually important to track are more these kind of leading factors. So you take the KPI and break it up into operational components that you can set targets on, because that's really what you're going to be measuring. So in the case of adoption, you're like, hey, if our value prop is based on having 200 users using and leveraging our platform to like improve supply chain, for example, you know, you need that, the number of users are actually tapping in the system is one of the metric you need to, you know, monitor and track. And then at the end, if everything nothing has changed, you will achieve the outcome, right? Just as a byproduct of you adhering to those standards in terms of leading indicators. So hopefully it's clear enough, right?
Yeah.
The challenge we have is we often want to focus on, I promised you 3 million a year, and that's what I'm measuring. But that's really kind of final state, right? Not the stuff you need to measure on an ongoing basis and adjust, right? Course correct during the adoption phase.
I like it. Thank you, Shek. Other thoughts? Who else is doing one thing? Yeah.
Aaron Siemens, ADP, SVP of Client Success. One of the things that we're doing, and this is something that is, I think, in our evolutionary stage right now, but it's collaborative success plans with clients and tying their objectives to in-product analytics to demonstrate whether or not they're achieving those objectives. So that's one of the things we've rolled out in this last year. And, you know, it's I think in the chat I added, we've got a lot of things happening in pockets. So our opportunity is to get really programmatic with that approach.
Yeah. Aaron, along those lines, is this for your payroll customers? Is this for the customers who are also doing HR? Could you get a lot of instrumentation out of your natural reporting from a payroll?
Yeah,
Give us a
on
little
the
bit of
HR
insight.
side too. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
so no, it really is, it's across the board. We have a lot of great payroll metrics, but we also have great talent data. We have information around self-service. So a lot of that is tied into the product. We have turnover metrics, we have overtime metrics. So that data that's the data that we tie back to the objectives the client is looking to achieve with the collaborative success plan.
I think one of your success factors that you just mentioned, Aaron, was the fact that you actually have some kind of organizational mechanism. Could be what we used to call at SAP a value management office. So you have some kind of cadence with the customer where you're actually reviewing what has been achieved. You're probably like doing a variance analysis for the things that did not progress as fast, and you're making on the fly adjustments. So that organizational component and that kind of human, you know, components of, hey, through QBRs or through set meetings over a period of time, I think that's a huge success factor. And typically what happens is you'll do the first two and then everyone gets fatigued. And the real value is after you've done like 15 of those, not the first two. To maintain that discipline.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a very high touch model, and that I think that makes this this work really well in our space.
Excellent.
Hi, Randy Perry from IDC. Just wanted to say, you know, and Aaron brings up a great case. We did projects several years ago for with SAP. And what SAP did very good when they were originally pushing out enterprise software solutions was that and of course they kind of designed a solution that was idealized for manufacturers, but wanted everybody to buy it. So what they would do would be to meet with their customers and pre-identify what they wanted to achieve with it, and also pre-identify what the before situation looked like. And then that way they could come in afterwards having already agreed upon what metrics they were going to look at and how they were going to measure them. And what they did was they sent us to go in later and do that. So they'd have a third party doing that part of the process, which would make their clients a little more forthcoming. But the point was they set everything up in the beginning. So they set up their goals they were going to achieve. And they also had their clients, the point of contact that they most dealt with, identify what it looked like before, because sometimes that gets lost in things like that. So what the metrics look like today, what we're going to measure, and then afterwards, and then afterwards, sometimes 2 years, because sometimes take a lot of time to realize the value. But the point was it helped them internally make the case again to push the next thing or to show this is the value we brought to you. But I think part of that is so key for companies to have that understanding in the beginning. That way, all you're doing is just measuring something you already decided you're going to measure. And then you show them how that relates to value, find a way to quantify that in ways that turn into dollars. And then even if you're looking at, such things that might be mundane in terms of what you're counting, the fact is you can relate them to ultimately their goals and to a dollar value gives you a model to, be successful with.
Excellent.
Could not
Thank
agree
you for
more, Randy, with what you said. And good to see familiar faces here today. The aspect of aligning on business goals, I think that's something as a simple thing that Salesforce is trying this year. So over the years, I've seen personally, value realization has failed in a way that we're not able to have enough feet on the street. Value engineers will probably never be able to scale and get into every conversation, even pre-sales, post-sales. So this year, what Salesforce tried as a crawl, walk, run approach, crawl being just have those initial conversations, right? Every CSM has got in their top 3 KPIs for this year to complete a mapping of our customers' business goals and KPIs as a starting point. So everything that you do after that, Erin spoke about those QBRs, adoption plans, all of that is hinging on a common definition of value. So that's something that we are trying as a concerted effort, and there is focus enablement for CSMs to have those value discussions and start aligning on business value upfront.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks for that, Anurag.
I'll add to that. I love what you just said, because this is Dion Hedgepeth from Sumo Logic. Because we have a formal value office. In fact, Pratik's on this call. He's the head of our value office. And I think we've done a really good job with a formal assessment and a business value review. The problem is that a lot of my customers will not engage in a formal ROI event until they need it to justify the renewal, even though we try to do it years in advance of the renewal and not tie it to a renewal. They just don't want to engage in that. So what we're trying to do now is a more casual effort. Whenever a TAM or a CSM is talking to the customer, I know we have CSPs in place just like Aaron in 70% of our big accounts. So we're asking the TAM, if the customer asks you like, hey, I need help building this dashboard, like you've got to take the time and say, why? What's the business value you're getting? And so the KPIs we're rolling out now for the team are just, you guys have to document at least 2 to 3 business outcomes for your client, right? It's not formal ROI process. It may not even be super measurable, but at least let's start with what are the 2 to 3 business outcomes that the customer is trying to achieve, some sort of like a middle ground to full ROI value realization.
Thanks for that, Dion.
Hey, Eric.
Any other? Yeah.
Eric, this is Tim Shaughnessy. So I lead our value team at ServiceNow. And one thing I'll add, what's unique and more of an observation is just the evolving personas that we're starting to see more and more partnering with us around value realization. If you think about like our product, right, we've been very good at gathering data, benchmarking, right, focusing on what I'd call the science of value realization, right, and being able to show trends in operational improvements. I think as, say, the office of the CFO, right, as they get more and more involved in digital transformation and having an active role in that, the conversations we're having with other CXO level personas are very different than maybe we have with other, say, VP or director level stakeholders, right? So I see our next level of maturity is really being able to, hey, how do we evolve from the science of value realization to more strategic, business-driven outcomes, right, that you can carry across multiple areas of the organization, which has been just an interesting, observation that we've had.
Yeah, this is Alex Hesterberg. I'll echo that as well. I think there's a couple of dynamics that all of our companies are playing into right now, which is the sort of merging or the mashing of the CIO's world and the CTO's world. And as a result, we've got a number of different personas that are essentially could be consumers of either direct consumers of our tech or indirect consumers of the outcomes of our technologies. And whether it was a time at Turbonomic or now at Delphix, like we're kind of drawing a line in the sand on making sure that every outcome where we tend to fall towards technical outcomes, it has to have a business correlation, and it has to have an associated persona. And so we try to start there. We usually start with use cases. We get to an outcome, and then someone mentioned earlier the importance of having the data or the metric tied to the outcome. We define that day one with the customer, actually now in pre-sales, so that by the time we're at the point of delivery, the outcome we're measuring has a predefined, mutually agreed to metric, and it keeps everybody accountable, and it prevents us from having to, deliver against unicorns and rainbows. We all come to the same conclusions on metrics to start with. So yeah, I strongly agree with what Tim just shared.
And to echo Tim's point, I think the idea, because you have more stakeholders involved in especially large decisions now, is that you have to design the metrics by persona, right? So if a line of business executive has input into the buying decision, you've got to realize they don't care what it does for IT, but create metrics to fit the persona that you can later deliver on. Because again, you're trying to lead lead the discussion, make it an easy decision for them to make in terms of the stakeholders, and then later be able to come back and prove it.
One thing I want to just build upon, this is Abi Ingle, head of digital and channels for ATT Business. I want to build on something that Anurag and Diane touched upon before. We tried to do something very, very rigorous and formal in terms of value realization, and it became so onerous in terms of the weight for the team and for the client itself that it kind of almost collapsed of its own weight. And what I really applaud is sort of what Anurag and Diane said, which is, okay, let's have a crawl, walk, run approach. And there's certain customers who will never want to run, and you just need to accept that, okay? They just don't want to run. They just want a little tie-in, but forcing your CSMs or your sales teams to have at least, what are the top three business goals? Map at least on paper during the QBR, what their business goals are to what we are providing at a high level without a mathematical model behind it. That is, frankly, for 70% of the accounts, that would be a step forward. And then depending on the client's involvement and desire to go deeper, you kind of make this something which is a, how do I put it, an extra, but don't make it a baseline element, because the reality is you're penalizing sales teams or customers just don't want to go there. I think Diane said that before. And that really rung true for me, because we went too far and the whole thing collapsed of its own weight in the past.
Yeah, Avi, I was
Avi,
really glad to hear you
thanks for
say
that.
that you guys are doing it for 70% of your clients. So even if a client isn't engaging, you're still going to have something in place in case there's a sponsor change, and you're able to quickly demonstrate the value at a high level, right?
Correct. Very high level.
That's
right.
great.
As I think Diane said, the crawl, or Anurag said the crawl or the walk, right?
Yeah, good. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
This is Doug May, VP of Value Acceleration at Databricks. But just to build on what Abhi said, I think it's also about making it simple to do. It's easy to take a value engineer, a value consultant, and go in with a hands-on touch and build a beautiful assessment and value realization analysis. And we will always do that. The reality is, with customer success teams, making it easy enough for them. They've got so much on their plates already. So what we've been doing is really try to make it paint by numbers for them. And so that it doesn't require a heavy-handed effort on their part. And it's something that they can weave into their simple motion. So it's the kind of like sales play concept for CS.
An alternative approach as well would be to educate the customer so they take ownership of that and deploy a value management office at the cadence and rhythm that is good for them. Because I think too often, again, that's where it becomes so burdensome. It becomes like a management consulting effort where the customer knows that when you're asking him all these questions, you're looking at what is my next sale, right? You want to prove to them that they've achieved value so you can give them a new contract for an expansion. But I think in a more subtle way is how do you help these organizations, especially in the digital and cloud world, where a lot of that information is captured in systems, but try to instill that internal discipline, right? Where there's great value in having like an IT team talk to the CFO if they're doing some finance transformation. And then if you're lucky enough, you'll be participating in that. But I think there's also the view from a customer, inside out, right? As opposed to, planting these vendor germs, right? And say you need to do value realization. Is for them to internalize the need that, it is valuable for their organization to be internally communicating success and being monitoring closely and adjusting on an ongoing basis, their strategy to meet the objective they've set for themselves.
Great. Thanks, Shek. Folks, phenomenal conversation. Actually, we've got 2 more questions that are going to come up that will delve into some of this. So keep that passion. We also wanted to share, and I'll hand it over to Eric Lam at this particular point in time, what we're doing in the Google Cloud world. And Eric Lam's going to kind of start off with the framework, and then Ted Orr, who's also from Google Cloud, is going to take you through a little bit of the way that he's thinking about how he's going to take this to his customers and his organization. So Eric, let me hand it off to you.
Thanks, Eric. My name is Eric Lam. I'm the partner engineering lead with now Google Cloud Solution Engineering Practice. As Eric mentioned, I think this is very relevant. What I'd like to share with you all today is what's our Google Cloud approach to value realizations and how it manifests itself into the customer success management practice, right? So as we all share, value realization is top of mind in a lot of CIOs. In matter of fact, there was a recent McKinsey survey that 80% of CIOs admit they haven't attained the benefits of business value as they adopt and transform their organization into the cloud. So it's certainly a top of mind in a lot of enterprises and organizations. So within Google, what we see is one of the top key priorities and initiatives, right? So we come looking at value realizations, we put together a solutioning, assessment, and framework to tackle this problem. So starting with the approach, we're looking at that as more of a building blocks on value realizations. One of the gentlemen mentioned earlier is a value management office. Within Google Cloud, we call it a cloud business office, right? Essentially, it is to a committee, right, to institutionalize and socialize some of the standards, best practices, processes, coordinating, across organizations from operations, engineering, finance team, establishing the governance and policy model to figure out how do you drive value as you transform the organization to the cloud. Second aspect to that is process value engineering, right? With the overall business office, what you need is understanding, there are bridges and gaps between the IT organizations and also looking through across, different organizations cross-functionally within the enterprise, right? Such as IT finance. The current, how we view IT financial management and looking at on the cloud financial management is very, very different. Right? How do you bridge that gap? Looking at aligning budget on an annual basis to more of ad hoc basis, that needs to be changed as well. So what are some of the innovative approach and more of the agile process we look at, changing the underlying processes to drive and increase efficiencies and value as you transform. And the third aspect is looking at from value from cost optimization as well, right? So, a lot of folks earlier mentioned about looking at KPIs and leading target metrics and laggards and so forth. The other side of the coin is also there's a discipline around cost optimizations. How do you continue to look at ways to more effectively leveraging resources spent on the cloud, especially within Google Cloud, right? You will have opportunities and resources where you can scale on demand, shutting down idling resources, right-sizing instances on compute and so forth, right? So all these tactics need to be ingrained as a discipline across, architectures, engineering developers, and so forth. So there's a whole mind shift set on how do you deploy application on the cloud versus when you deploy an architect application on-prem. And finally, right, wrapping all this together, we enable with a set of tools and accelerator to accomplish this, right? Phil Jackson mentioned, dashboard is great, but you really need to figure out what are sort of the metrics that you need to track and measure. How are they aligned? How are these KPIs aligned to the business outcome and so forth, right? So we have, established a comprehensive sort of building blocks on value realizations and create a mature assessment, right? So we talked about earlier, not all organization enterprise need to be, at the run state. 100% agree with that, right? But at the same time, we need to figure out what are the gaps within the organization and where can we maximize that value as the organization and transform to the cloud. Right. So some of the things that we think about in the cloud business office, just to double click into that a little bit, right? One thing that in many of our conversations with CIOs, CTOs, even CFOs, is understanding the shift from fixed data center access to on-demand, subscription-based pay-as-you-go model, right? So the shift from CapEx to OpEx, the policies around that, how do you manage and navigate that? How do you provide the cost transparency that the cloud provide you, right? That you typically don't get on-prem, right? A lot of business case that we have done in the past, right, is you have to first establish a baseline. What is your on-premise cost? And then looking at it from a TCO perspective and the ROI driven on how, as you transform to the cloud, what is that cost comparison? And the way to do that is IT cost transparency, right? You need a visibility into what are your on-premises costs, establishing that baseline to then figure out what is your target that you're looking to achieve. So I'll pause there, just a little bit of sharing of what we see, and we'd love to get feedback and hear from this group on how you guys are tackling that, right? And does this resonate with the folks on the phone? And also I'll hand it over to Ted on how does this manifest itself across our customer success organizations.
Great, thanks Eric, and hello everybody. One thing to baseline for the group is that customer success is a new function within Google Cloud. I think it was about 10 months since it was a glimmer in Thomas Kurian's eyes to today. And so historically, Google Cloud has been very successful with our customers, focusing on really the technical outcomes and really establishing kind of the value from that standpoint. And the view was to help elevate that conversation, drive more towards the business value assessed as well as realized through spinning up groups such as the Cloud Value Advisors, such as customer success, to have that specific focus. So some of the things that I'll speak about is really around work in progress, things that we are going after in order to really drive that value realization moving forward. And first off is about leveraging advanced tooling to help assess, understand customer usage and patterns. We're taking two approaches here. Number one, we're consolidating customer telemetry of what we have available today, and that's into one single pane of glass, and we're building an internal tool called Workbench to do that. And today that has elements for commit, consumption, product usage, learning objectives, support cases, more of the things that we can trigger upon for both proactive as well as reactive actions for our customers. But those are pretty tactical, right? And so the second prong is really looking for meaningful customer adoption and usage patterns. So unlike the SaaS world, we don't have the deep user behavior introspection, right? Page time clicks, feature usage and adoption for stickiness, those elements. For us, it's all about the products and services that our customers are leveraging and how those map to our solutions. So, and our solutions can map to multiple ways our customers can bring our products and services together. And we don't have the introspection into those actual workloads of what the customers are putting on Google Cloud Platform. So it becomes a little bit trickier for us to really drive into the details and map that correlation. So what we're really doing is, we're working with Cloud Value Advisors, working with our solutions engineering teams to build out our solutions, map those to our products and services, and be able to look at how the customers are adopting that through a few different ways, right? Right now we have the raw product, service usage, consumption, but this doesn't map to customer outcomes. As we are profiling our solutions and the products and services they leverage, we're able to gain greater insights into what areas the customers are leaning into with our solutions, what outcomes we set out to achieve, and how they're tracking against those. We are leveraging more of collaboration with our customers, with our field teams on mapping the solutions to specific customer projects to gain that traceability, looking at metadata approaches, looking at ways that we can extend product in order to allow us to help better realize that value for the customers, be able to track those. But this is a bit early in our journey towards that. Like I said, our primary focus right now has been consolidating the customer telemetry that we have. We have a gazillion dashboards, spreadsheets, different systems that we can pull all that together. But in order to really be proactive, be very customer focused, we don't want to spend all of our time looking at different and disparate tools. We want to have that one single pane of glass in order to take action and effort on that. The other area in the bottom quadrant around shared competency in pre-sales and sales and professional service and customer success. And I'll reiterate Eric's initial opening that this also extends to marketing, this extends to product, all the things that we can do to have a single flow of motion across all of the teams, right? A former sales colleague of mine and a couple of the folks on the call also know this individual, but you say that the best day for the vendor is the day the contract is signed, right? But too often it's also the worst day for the customer because they're left holding the bag on execution about really achieving that value realization. And it's really incumbent upon us delivering customer value to ensure it's a seamless flow of motion across sales, pre-sales, PS, and CS. And that, for us here at Google Cloud, really means, we have solution engineering building out horizontal solutions and vertical solutions and use cases for our sales and CEs to go to market with, right? They're aligned with the CVA team, the Cloud Value Advisors, to assess the customer specific business needs, outcomes, objectives, KPIs, and overall business case against the solutions, right? The customer success managers, and this kind of resonated through some of the conversation earlier, is that it really is about going from value engineering, assessing the value, to moving into customer success where we realize the value for the customer. And the stronger the linkage there, the better. And then we, of course, then work with professional services and partners to drive that build out of the prescriptive packages, and also the delivery and support of the solutions through the execution. So we are really driving that seamless flow of motion. We have a shared vision for what this becomes in elevating that conversation from technical outcomes to business outcomes. But this is a journey for us, right? And as we go barreling down the highway and we're building these pieces out, it's been really critical for us to have that shared vision. So I know that as Eric Ranta builds out the value advisory around the solutions, we have that shared vision of having that be a key part of our success plans that our customer success managers then go with the customer to execute. And we're already building our success plans and leveraging to really have hooks for those elements. And one of the comments earlier was, for 70% of our customers, focusing on 3 or 4 outcomes at a high level is enough without going into the deep, arduous tasks of measuring that value moving forward. We already have that in our success plan. And for the customers that we really can boil that down into KPIs, measurements, we're able to then double click and go deeper in those areas. But again, it is built off that same vision, off that same flow motion through the different teams. But with that, that's a little bit of a glimpse at what we're doing here at Google Cloud, and happy to answer more questions as well.
Eric and Ted, thank you. Also want to thank Steve Kretschmann and Perry Silverman, who are leading the ecosystems and tooling implementation for Google Cloud. They're on as well. It's really nice when you don't have to go and convince your peers and other organizations that this is important, when all you have to do is make sure that you come together on a shared vision. So thanks for that. So let's go to our next question. We'll keep the discussion flowing. And this is where I'd like to get really honest. And some of you may want to be honest in the chat. Others may want to voice this. Fine either way. What is the one thing that you would like to improve in value realization going forward? And I'll open up the chat. What is something that you would like to see your organization do that would be, it could be fundamental, it could be very ambitious, but what's that one thing that you would like to master in the upcoming year?
I'll go first. This is Shek. I would say the one thing that in my eyes is absolutely critical is integrate value realization as part of the normal customer success endeavor. So it's not decoupled, it's standard operating procedure. It's actually not just value realization, but the whole VE cycle. Because too often we build a business case, customers happy, we sell them whatever it is that we sell them, and then we forget. So kind of transitioning those like success metrics and success parameters throughout the organization, so that there's a formal handoff to the implementation team and customer success, so that they're designing the right solution, they're deploying the right solution. And then I think the value realization will flow more naturally, as opposed to being kind of an export.
Excellent. Thanks, Shek.
Hey, this is Erin again. I would agree with Sheik, and I think even take it to something Doug May said in the chat. An area for us, and I think I alluded to it earlier, we have a lot of pockets of different groups in our organization that are having conversations with clients about what they want to achieve and trying to drive that value realization. And we do a lot of selling into the existing client base, but we're not very good at driving that joint accountability between our sales, our customer success. We even have a separate client marketing from a sales marketing team, and product kind of exists out on its own. So our big opportunity this year is going to be to do what Doug said has been successful for them at Splunk, which is to get all of those stakeholders aligned, all speaking the same language, all looking at the client base as a shared group that we can go after and drive value realization for it, and seeing what's in it for them to do that in a coordinated fashion. So that's a big priority for us this year, and it's going to be honestly like pushing a rock up a hill from what I can see.
So.
Yes, it is, Aaron.
I'll tell you, it is. It's pushing a rock up a hill. But once everyone buys in, and once you have that alignment, everything moves faster. It's unbelievable. So it's definitely a slow down to speed up sort of thing.
Yeah. Hey, Doug, you've kind of reached a point of success there. What's the next thing that you're going to do to improve? What's the next ambition that you have?
Well, so I left Splunk a year ago. I'm at Databricks now, but it was a 7-year journey at Splunk where we took one individual contributor as a value acceleration individual and then scaled the program end to end with dozens across the globe and automation from end to end for sales as well as CS. Lots of capability maturity assessment sort of automation too. So a lot of the themes that we've heard the team talk about here. What I really think, as I started the Databricks journey a year ago was what we did in 6.5 years at Splunk. I just want to do it in about 18 months at Databricks. I think now we know where we're going. And I think the experience of this team here on this session is, you couldn't have had this session 10 years ago. So I feel like so much more experience is out there in the world and the lessons that people had to learn and the clearing of the brush that many had to do to get through the rainforest, those paths are clear now, and it's much easier to see where you want to get to. So I'm a year into Databricks, and we'll be deploying what I call the TurboTax interview of business cases, automating effectively what is that value consultant, value engineer role for sales and CS, put it in the hands of them in a powerful platform. And we're going to do that in about 16 months versus 3 years in the journey. So it's all about speed now that we know where we want to go.
Thank you for that, Doug. Appreciate that.
And Doug, you're doing the same kind of quote unquote TurboTax interview for both sales and customer service, or are you basically saying there is a continuum of questions to be covered there, but when sales ask them and customer service asks them, and as Aaron said, we have the same situation, client marketing going in there too on their own. Do you basically orchestrate who asks what, or are they just asking the same thing in different ways to get kind of correlation to the same areas?
Yeah, Abby, it's a great question. We really spent a lot of time in the past at Splunk designing the user interface of the tooling. We put spreadsheets in front of sales and they threw them away. We put some basic automation in front of them and they struggled with it and went to their SEs and said, "You do it." So I come from a long background in sales, and I believe that if you can get a salesperson to do it, you can get anybody to do it. And so the key there is making it really simple. And so I use the metaphor of TurboTax because they took the IRS code, Intuit did, and made it so easy that you and I can complete our own taxes. And all it does is ask us very simple questions. Did you buy a house this year or not? And so that design metaphor for the sales persona is critical, because if it's too intimidating, they will not do it, and you will never scale your function. I think in the CS world, at least I see here at Databricks, it's a very technical product. So when you have a very technical persona, you still face the same challenge of a new topic like value being somewhat intimidating. So anything you can do to simplify that. So our deployment will be entirely the same UI for both pre and post sales. So I hope that helps, but it's really around designing for the persona. And at least at this point, I feel it's all about simplicity.
Thanks for that, Doug.
Thank you.
Anybody else with any other items that they want to improve?
This is Sean from Procore. I run our value consulting practice here. One interesting piece that we're wrestling with right now is we have pretty good adoption from sales. We have pretty good adoption from CS. We're trying to figure out how to loop in our implementation teams more, though, to recommend implementation based on the business case that we created in the sales motion. So that's one of the areas that I think we're working on most this year, but also struggling to connect the dots a little bit, is if the software is not implemented correctly or implemented toward the business value that we're trying to drive, then sometimes the customer success managers are having an issue getting that adoption and driving the value that we claimed we would drive up front. So that's one of the big areas that we're focused on for this year, is connecting that kind of linchpin of the implementation teams with the other two groups.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. So folks, to be respectful of time. Oh, actually, do we have one more comment? I heard somebody
Yeah,
speak up.
just a quick comment from Sugato Dev National Instruments. This topic that Sean put out, I think there was a lot of value loss we saw between the upfront value identification phase and the downstream value implementation phase, both at the customer as well as for ourselves, because the teams change. You know, there are business focused upfront teams, and then there are technically focused implementation teams on the back end. So one of the things we did is we added a formal phase in between these two. We just call it a business planning phase. It essentially is a translator between the business, high-level business KPIs into actionable implementations that can be done. And we use business flow maps in the in-between phase to kind of do that. And we do it both with the customer as well as with our team. So both teams understand how the value realization sort of supports the upfront value identification that they've done. And it's a different persona of people we needed to hire for those roles than the traditional ones on the two ends of the spectrum.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Yeah, oftentimes there's very few methodologies that are tuned for optimizing value. They're tuned for
the translation is what I call it. It gets lost in the translation.
Sugato, where do these people sit in the organization? If you kind of think of, value identification, value realization, or, pre-sales, sales, and then customer success, do they sit? Where do they sit?
We have, for the time being, tied them up with upfront value selling team, value identification team. They come in on the back end of the value identification and participate with us as well as with the customer. And then they do the translation. So there isn't a perfect home right now, but I think they needed, for us, the bigger gap was the translation from the business to the technology. And we have now kept them in that phase. And then over time, we'll see if there's a better position for them in the organization.
Do you comp them like sales or pre-sales?
We comp them like pre-sales. And again, it's just the alignment right now. Over time, we will mature it. But it was a clear identification that it's a different competency than either the value identification, pre-sales value identification upfront versus the, the value or the integration team that comes in on the back end of it. We had both of the front and the back. We were missing the middle.
So folks, I hate to do this.
The SIA has now started putting into their framework, so you can see that work in there.
Yeah. Sugato, thank you. Folks, we're going to have to call it a wrap. We have got 1 minute left, and we just want to give one closing thought. Fantastic session today. Thank you. If you want to advance the final slide. We're going to get together every so often. And essentially what we want to be able to do is have the kind of the vibrancy of this group that we've had in the hour here continue on going forward. So please, if you're interested in participating in kind of the value management realization, please reach out to Kasha and she'll coordinate that. And we'll make sure we get together, give some case studies where those are willing to share. And quite frankly, I think this is something where we can all learn from one another. So Kasha, any final thoughts for this group?
Maybe I'll jump in, Eric. I want to thank everybody. I think the word vibrancy probably is the way to think about this. 1 hour we had together, we had 41 different companies, and actually, by my count, 15 different examples that each participant's kind of sharing with the larger group. So obviously, we're hitting a nerve. We'd love you to participate in the workshop. This community is so vibrant. So as Eric mentioned, please engage with Kasha to opt in for ongoing sessions around value management. And I just want to end by thanking Eric and the Google team for kind of sharing their journey and where they're at, and wish everybody in the community a great day, and we'll get after it. Thanks all.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.